When a bully attacked the teacher, everyone froze, until a quiet black girl stepped in and changed the whole school. The classroom froze. Mr. Denvers, a soft-spoken science teacher, stood helpless as Mark, school bully, football star, and principal's nephew, grabbed a handful of his hair and yanked. "You failed me on purpose," Mark shouted. Students gasped, some filmed on their phones. Mr. Denvers winced in pain, but didn't fight back. 3 minutes later, the door swung open. A quiet black girl, Amina Carter, stepped inside, clutching a stack of library books. She stopped. Her expression changed, and the room suddenly felt different. Amina hated attention. Straight-A student, robotics club champion, scholarship candidate, yet almost invisible in a school ruled by athletes. She walked toward her desk, eyes locked on Mark's hand tangled in their teacher's hair. "Let him go," she said softly. Mark laughed. The other students whispered. Amina really. But her calmness felt dangerous. Measured. Focused. Mark raised an eyebrow. "You talking to me?" Amina set her books down carefully. "Yes," she said. "And I won't say it twice." Everyone knew Amina didn't fight. What they didn't know, she could fight. 2 years ago, she'd protected her little brother from older boys in her neighborhood. Word spread fast. The quiet girl who ended a gang fight in 60 seconds. But Amina never bragged. Today, though, she felt old sparks returning. Mr. Denvers met her eyes, silently pleading. Amina took a slow breath. Not again, she told herself. But Mark pulled harder. And she snapped. Amina stepped closer. "Let him go." Mark grinned and shoved the teacher, making him stumble. "Or what, you gonna solve it with math?" he mocked. Amina finally moved. Before Mark realized it, she swiped his wrist in one clean motion, a martial arts grip reversal, forcing him to release the teacher instantly. Mark yelped. The class went dead silent. Amina didn't hurt him. She simply neutralized him. Her voice was steady. "You failed your test because you didn't study. That's your fault." Mark stared, stunned. No one had ever talked to him like that. The door slammed open minutes later. Principal Harris stormed in, red-faced. "What happened here? Why is Mark holding his wrist?" Everyone prepared for Amina to get blamed, like always. Mark opened his mouth to lie, but then stopped. He looked at Amina. She didn't look scared. She didn't even look angry. Just honest. For the first time, guilt hit him. He muttered, "I pulled Mr. Denver's hair." The class gasped. Amina blinked in surprise. The principal froze. Mr. Denvers stepped forward, his usually calm face carrying a tension no one in the room had ever seen on him before. "Sir, Amina prevented the situation from getting worse," he said, his voice steady but edged with frustration, as though he had been holding these words back for far too long. The principal, a man who prided himself on neutrality and discipline, stiffened. His brows pulled together in disbelief as he looked from Mr. Denvers to the trembling teacher in question, Miss Hartley, whose eyes were still red from the shock of what happened. Mark would never assault a teacher, the principal insisted, as if saying it firmly enough could rewrite the events everyone had just witnessed. The classroom fell into a suffocating silence. A few students exchanged uneasy glances, others shifting in their seats, afraid to speak, but knowing the truth weighed heavy in the air. Mark sat rigidly in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched, trying desperately to look innocent, but the tension in the room was about to snap. That's when, from the back of the classroom, a voice, shaky, young but bold, cut through the silence. "We recorded it." A sudden wave of gasps rustled through the room like wind through trees. The principal blinked, stunned. Phones lifted into the air, 5, 6, 10 of them, held by students who had been too afraid to speak earlier, but were no longer willing to watch Amina be blamed for something she didn't do. Fingers tapped screens, videos opened, and within seconds the classroom filled with the unmistakable sound of chaos. Mark shouting, the scrape of a chair, Miss Hartley's terrified voice pleading, "Stop, Mark, stop, let go." Then the image became clear for everyone to see. Mark, standing over the teacher's desk, yanking her hair with an anger so visible it made the room go dead silent. The footage captured Miss Hartley leaning forward in pain, struggling to free herself while Mark refused to let go. And then came the moment everyone had whispered about: Amina, stepping forward with calm bravery, no anger, no violence, no hesitation. She gently but firmly separated Mark's hand from the teacher's hair, positioning herself between them like a barrier made of quiet strength. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shove him, didn't even glare at him. She simply stood her ground and used steady words. "That's enough, Mark, walk away." In the video, Mark looked stunned, like he couldn't process that someone smaller, quieter, and younger had stopped him. But the truth was undeniable. And now the principal was watching it unfold from 3 different angles, each one confirming the same reality. The principal's face drained of all color. His mouth parted slightly as the heavy weight of misjudgment settled on his shoulders. He had almost accused the wrong child, almost punished the one who had done nothing wrong except be brave in the face of danger. Miss Hartley covered her mouth with her hand as tears welled up again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of the truth finally being spoken aloud. This can't be real," the principal muttered, eyes glued to the screen. "Mark," his voice cracked on the name. Mark's bravado collapsed instantly. His shoulders slumped, his face turned pale, and his eyes filled with dread. He sank deeper into his chair, looking suddenly smaller, younger, and lost. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them, realizing the entire classroom had witnessed his outburst, and worse, there was proof. Amina, still sitting quietly in her seat, kept her gaze lowered, almost embarrassed by the attention. She had never wanted this. She had only wanted to protect her teacher. She reached down, collecting her books slowly, carefully, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. But she wasn't invisible, she was the center of the entire room's focus. The students who had recorded the scene watched her with new respect, whispering to each other about her courage. Some wondered how someone so gentle had the strength to stop something so frightening without ever losing her calm. The principal finally looked at her, and for the first time since the chaos began, his expression softened with guilt. "Amina," he said quietly, "why didn't you come straight to me? Why didn't you tell anyone what happened?" Amina looked up, her eyes large and unsure. "Because." She began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want Mark to get expelled. I just wanted him to stop." Her answer stunned the room even more than the video had. Mark lifted his head, eyes wide, unable to understand why the person he had mocked, pushed aside, and targeted with insults would care about his future at all. The principal swallowed hard, clearly ashamed that he had doubted her. "You prevented someone from getting hurt," he said softly. "You protected your teacher when no one else did, and you did it without violence." A murmur of agreement swept through the students. For the first time, the room didn't feel tense, it felt united. They had all seen the truth now. No rumors, no lies, no twisted stories, only evidence, only bravery, only the reality that Amina had done something no one else had the courage to do. Mark exhaled shakily, rubbing his forehead. I didn't mean," he stammered, but his voice cracked. He wasn't used to being exposed. He wasn't used to being held accountable in front of everyone. The principal nodded sternly. "Mark, we will talk about consequences shortly, but for now, you need to understand something very important. What you did was not just wrong, it was dangerous." Mark nodded slowly, not daring to argue. He looked at Amina again, guilt weighing heavily on him. She simply gave a small nod back, not out of pity, but out of quiet understanding. When the bell finally rang, breaking the tension, the classroom didn't explode into noise the way it normally did. Students moved more slowly, more thoughtfully, whispering about what had just happened. Amina gathered her books, clutching them to her chest as she made her way toward the door. She just wanted to leave, to find a quiet corner somewhere and breathe. But before she could reach the hallway, Miss Hartley stepped in front of her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "You saved me." Amina blinked, startled, and then nodded once. "You're welcome, miss." She didn't know what else to say. She didn't need to say anything else. The truth had come out, loud, clear, undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, people were finally seeing Amina for who she truly was. Not a quiet girl in the corner, not someone easy to overlook, but someone strong, calm and brave in a way most people never expected, and that truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. After school, the hallways were quieter than usual, the chaos of the day still lingering in the air like a ghost no one wanted to talk about out loud. Students kept glancing at Amina as she walked, whispers following her like shadows. Some looked impressed, others curious, a few even guilty for never standing up to mark themselves. Amina ignored them all, moving toward her locker with her usual calm, trying to pretend everything was normal. But when she reached the familiar metal door and began turning the lock, she sensed someone approach, not from the noise, but from the heaviness of the footsteps. She didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Mark. She stiffened ever so slightly. She expected the usual insults, the mocking tone, maybe a sarcastic comment about being a hero. She braced herself for it. But instead, Mark stopped beside her, hands shoved awkwardly into his hoodie pockets, eyes not meeting hers. He cleared his throat, the sound oddly small coming from someone who usually filled the hall with noise. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. She blinked, confused. "Do what?" Mark lifted his hand, rubbing his wrist where she had stopped him earlier. "With my wrist, the way you moved it. How did you do that?" Amina hesitated. She had never talked to him like this, never seen him like this. Vulnerable, curious, human. She shrugged gently. "My mom taught me self-defense," she said. "She was in the military before she moved here." Mark's eyebrows shot up slightly. "For real?" "Yeah," she replied, opening her locker. "She taught me how to stop someone without hurting them." Mark nodded slowly, looking genuinely impressed instead of judgmental. "Thanks for not breaking my arm," he muttered. Amina paused, then gave a tiny, almost shy smile. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." Mark let out a long breath, leaning against the lockers. "Yeah, I know, that's kinda what made it worse." She glanced at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He looked down at the floor, scuffing his shoe against the tile. "You weren't scared of me," he said. "Everyone else freaks out when I yell. They either run or shut up. But you," he shook his head. "You didn't even flinch." Amina didn't say anything at first. She studied him quietly, taking in the cracks in the armor he always wore. "Why do you need people to be scared of you?" She finally asked. The question landed heavier than she expected. Mark opened his mouth to answer, closed it again, then tried a second time. "I don't know," he said. Maybe because if they're scared, they won't see I don't have anything else." It was the first honest thing she'd ever heard him say. For once, Mark looked less like a bully and more like a confused, lonely kid who had no idea what to do with his own emotions. Amina didn't pity him, she simply understood him more clearly now. "You know," she said gently, "you don't have to be scary to be respected." Mark snorted lightly, but it wasn't mean, more like he wasn't used to hearing someone talk to him without fear or anger. "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "You're you," she frowned. "What does that mean?" "You're calm," he said. "You don't freak out, you don't yell, you just do things in this quiet way that's kind of." He struggled for a word. "Strong," he finished. Amina stared at him, stunned. She had never once thought anyone saw her that way. To most people, she was just the quiet girl, the one who kept to herself, the one teachers forgot to call on, the one who blended into corners. But here was Mark, the loudest person in school, telling her something she didn't even know about herself. She closed her locker slowly. "My mom used to say," she began softly, "that strength isn't loud. It's controlled. Loud people want to be noticed. Strong people don't need to be." Mark swallowed, looking like the words hit him in a place he didn't want anyone to see. "Guess I've been loud for a long time," he said with a humorless smile. "Maybe too long." Amina tilted her head. "You can change that. People don't just change overnight," Mark muttered. "Maybe not," she said, "but they can start." He looked at her again, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was no anger, no smugness, no arrogant tilt to his chin, only uncertainty and hope. "Why'd you defend me in front of the principal?" he asked suddenly. "You could have let them think whatever, I deserved it." She shook her head. "I didn't defend you, I just told the truth, that's all." Mark stared at her, confused. "Why?" she shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do." He ran a hand over his hair, struggling with emotions he clearly didn't have practice dealing with. "I'm not good at this stuff," he admitted. "Talking, being real. It takes practice," Amina said gently. "Maybe try not starting with fights." He cracked a small, unexpected laugh. "Yeah, maybe." A group of students walked by, slowing down slightly when they saw Mark talking to Amina. Normally, he would have barked at them, told them to mind their own business, reasserted his dominance. But he didn't, he just ignored them. Amina noticed. Mark noticed her noticing. "Don't make it weird," he said quickly. She smiled again, just a little. "I'm not." "Good," he muttered. "Because this is already weird." She nodded. "A little." They stood there in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable but unfamiliar, like two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge trying to decide whether to meet in the middle. Mark shifted on his feet. "Look, I'm not saying we're friends or anything." "Okay," she said, "but maybe I don't know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe I don't want to be that guy anymore." Amina looked at him with steady eyes. "Then don't be." It was such a simple answer, yet it felt like the first real step Mark had been offered in a long time. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. "Thanks," he said finally, "for today, for not hating me." "I don't hate you," Amina said softly. "People make mistakes, some big, some small, but they're still mistakes. Not definitions." Mark stared at her like she was speaking a language he'd never heard before but desperately wanted to understand. "You're weird," he said, "in a good way." "So I've been told," she replied. He let out another small laugh. "See you tomorrow, I guess." "Yeah," she said, "tomorrow." Mark walked away, shoulders not as puffed up, steps not as aggressive, the weight of the day sitting heavily, but maybe, for once, in a way that could change something. Amina watched him go, then closed her locker gently. Her secret strength hadn't been her self-defense training. It hadn't been her mom's lessons. It was something else entirely, her ability to stay calm in storms other people created. And for the first time, someone else had finally seen it. A day later, the school felt strangely calm, as though the chaos of earlier in the week had settled into a quiet hum beneath everyone's conversations. Gossip still bubbled, but it was softer now, filled more with curiosity than shock. Amina sat in the library, her notebooks neatly stacked, her pencil case open, and her focus set on finishing her math assignment before lunch. She liked the quiet here, the smell of old pages, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of someone turning a page. Peace. But that peace didn't last long. Principal Harris appeared in the door, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. Amina straightened instinctively. He approached with a polite smile, hands clasped behind his back. "Amina," he said gently, "do you have a moment?" She nodded. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've decided on Mark's consequence for his behavior." Amina braced herself. Detention, suspension, expulsion. Instead, the principal cleared his throat and said, "I'm assigning him to academic tutoring after school." She blinked. "Okay, with you." Her jaw almost dropped. "With me?" Principal Harris nodded. "You're one of our top students, and you clearly demonstrated composure under pressure." She didn't know whether to feel honored or punished. But before she could respond, the principal added, "He respects you more than you realize." She highly doubted that, but arguing wouldn't change anything. "All right," Amina said quietly, "I'll try." Later that day, after the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms in waves, Amina made her way to the tutoring room with a mix of dread and cautious acceptance. She set up her things at a table by the window, straightened the worksheets, and took a breath. Then the door swung open. Mark walked in, not stomping, not swaggering, just walking. He spotted her, blinked slowly, and then, just to make things worse, sat right next to her. "You're kidding," she whispered, staring at him like he was a misplaced puzzle piece. Mark dropped his bag onto the floor and slouched in the chair. "Yeah," he muttered. "I'm supposed to learn from the girl who flipped me." Amina rolled her eyes, a tiny smirk tugging at her lips. "It was barely a flip. I hit the floor," he said. "Hard." "Because you lost balance," she corrected. "I didn't throw you." He huffed, but there was no anger in the sound, more like reluctant amusement. She handed him the first worksheet. "Start with this." "You sound like a teacher," he grumbled. "Part of tutoring," she said. "I talk, you listen." "You're bossy," he muttered. "Only when necessary." He stared at her for a second, then cracked a small smile despite himself. They began working, slowly, painfully slowly. Mark read each question with the expression of someone trying to understand ancient hieroglyphics. His pencil hovered above the paper, tapping rhythmically as he thought. "This stuff is impossible," he groaned. "It's algebra," Amina said. "Not a dragon. Feels like one." She leaned slightly closer, pointing to the problem. "Look, you're overthinking. Just isolate the variable." "How do you isolate something that doesn't want to be isolated?" "Mark," she said, struggling not to laugh. "It's a letter, not a person." He sighed dramatically but tried again. Amina watched, offering gentle corrections, sometimes nudging his pencil in the right direction, sometimes explaining with the patience of someone who had taught younger cousins before. What surprised her was not that Mark struggled. Everyone knew he didn't do well in class, but that he actually tried. He didn't throw the worksheet, didn't slam his head on the table, didn't complain endlessly. He just tried, and the more he tried, the more she softened. He wasn't stupid. He was just behind. Every time he got something right, his eyes widened a little, like he was discovering a part of himself no one had ever bothered to show him. See, she said after he completed a problem correctly. You did that one. Mark glanced at the paper, disbelief in his voice. I actually did. Told you, she said. You're not as bad at this as you think. Or maybe you're just a freakishly good teacher. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied. They kept working for nearly an hour, and something strange happened in that time, something neither of them expected. The silence between questions wasn't uncomfortable. Their small jokes weren't edged with annoyance. Mark didn't try to act tough. Amina didn't act intimidated. They simply learned together. At one point, Mark glanced at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Hey, he said quietly. Why are you being nice to me? She shrugged. You're trying, that's enough. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. No one had ever praised him for trying before. They only yelled when he failed. The clock on the wall ticked toward 5 and Amina gathered her things. Same time tomorrow? She asked. Mark surprised her by nodding immediately. Yeah, okay. They walked to the hallway together, not side by side, more like near each other. Students passing by did double takes. Amina felt a little awkward. Mark pretended not to notice. Just before they reached the exit, Mark stopped. Hey, he said again, quieter this time. I know you think I'm just some jerk who picks fights because I want to. Aren't you? Amina asked, not accusingly, just honestly. Mark shook his head. I don't want to be that guy, he swallowed. I just don't know how to be anything else. Amina looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth behind his words. Learning takes time, she said softly, even for people. He huffed a small laugh. So I'm a math problem now? Maury, like a puzzle, she said, a complicated one. He gave her a lopsided grin. Figures. For the first time since they'd known each other, their conversation didn't end with tension. It ended with a strange, quiet understanding. And something unexpected happened in that tutoring room, something no one would have predicted a week earlier. They stopped being enemies. Not friends, not yet, but the ground between them shifted just a little, enough for possibility to grow. The following week arrived faster than anyone expected, and the atmosphere in the classroom carried a strange mix of tension and curiosity. Everyone had heard whispers. Mark was acting different, not yelling, not picking fights, actually doing his homework. No one knew what to make of it, and the rumors only grew louder when Mr. Denvers announced at the start of class, before we begin today's lesson, someone has something they'd like to say. A wave of confused murmurs rolled across the room as Mark stood up slowly from his desk. He didn't shove his chair back, didn't smirk, didn't swagger to the front like he usually did. He simply walked forward, hands trembling slightly, his face pale in a way no one had ever seen before. The class fell silent. Even the students who usually whispered through every announcement froze, as if sensing something important was happening. Mark cleared his throat. Once. Twice. His voice cracked on the third attempt to speak. I want to apologize, he said, eyes glued to the front wall as though afraid to look at anyone directly. The class sucked in a collective breath. No one had ever heard Mark say those words in his entire school career. He swallowed hard. To Mr. Denvers, he continued, turning slightly toward the teacher. I disrespected you. I shouldn't have grabbed you or yelled or acted like I didn't care about anything. Mr. Denvers, who was usually stern and unshakably professional, offered a soft smile and a small nod, his eyes warmer than usual. Then Mark took a deep breath and shifted his weight, his eyes finally drifting toward where Amina sat. She felt heat rise to her cheeks before he even said her name. And to Amina, he said, voice thick, hands twisting nervously at his sides. I treated you like a target, like it was your job to take my attitude. You didn't deserve that. Not even for a second. Amina lowered her eyes, not out of shame, but because the emotion in his voice was something she wasn't prepared for. It felt too honest, too raw. The class watched in stunned silence as Mark continued. I was failing because I thought I was too good to study, too good to try. I made fun of people who cared about school because I didn't want them to see that I was scared to try and still fail. A few students exchanged glances. They hadn't expected that. Mark swallowed again. But Amina, she showed me something I didn't expect. She showed me what real strength looks like. And it's not yelling or throwing desks or getting people to move out of your way. His eyes lifted briefly, meeting hers, and she saw something she had never seen in him before: gratitude, respect, vulnerability. Strength, he said, voice steadier now, is staying calm when things get messy. It's choosing to help someone even when they don't deserve it. It's doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Amina's chest tightened with a warmth she couldn't explain. She had never asked for this moment, never imagined it would happen, never even thought Mark was capable of something like this. But here he was standing in front of everyone, peeling back the layers he had used to shield himself for years. and he was doing it because he wanted to change. A few students whispered excitedly, shocked by every word. Some even leaned forward in their seats, as if witnessing a rare event they knew they'd never see again. Mark took another breath and said, "I'm sorry to both of you, and I'm really trying." For a full second, no one moved. Then unexpectedly, someone in the back began clapping, slowly, awkwardly, unsure, but sincere. Another joined, then another. And suddenly the entire room filled with applause, loud, echoing, filling every corner of the classroom with a warmth no one anticipated. Mark's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the support. He stepped back, cheeks flushed, clearly embarrassed but also a little relieved. Mr. Denvers gave him a proud nod, like a teacher acknowledging a student who had done something far more meaningful than solving an equation. Amina raised her eyes, and when Mark looked at her, she offered a small, genuine smile, not forgiveness, because she had already given that silently, but recognition. Recognition of the courage it took to stand there and admit everything in front of everyone. Her chest felt warm in a way she couldn't hide. She had never expected an apology, certainly not one like this. And as the applause faded and Mark returned to his seat, something settled in the room, something no one could quite name but everyone felt. Respect, change, a new beginning. Weeks later, the school hallways buzzed with their usual end-of-semester energy, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking across the floors, teachers reminding students about missing assignments. But for Mark, today wasn't just another school day. He walked down the hallway clutching a folded paper so tightly it wrinkled at the edges. Amina stood near their usual tutoring spot, reviewing her notes like she always did, calm and focused. When Mark approached, his steps were lighter than normal, almost bouncy. "Amina," he called, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. She looked up, eyebrows raised in curiosity. Without a word, he handed her the paper. She unfolded it and scanned the score. A bold, solid B stared back at her, clean, honest, earned. Her lips parted slightly before a proud smile broke across her face. "You did it," she said, warmth filling her voice. Mark shook his head immediately. "No," he replied, tapping the test paper. "We did." She rolled her eyes lightly. "Didn't take the test for you." "No," he said, smiling in a way that wasn't cocky or defensive, just sincere. "But you taught me how to believe I could do it." The words hit her deeper than she expected. Amina wasn't used to being acknowledged like that, not at home, not in class, not by anyone except maybe her mom. She crossed her arms, a little shy now, and replied quietly, "All you needed was someone to remind you you're capable." Mark hesitated for a second, then spoke gently. "You needed someone to notice you." Her eyes lifted, and something in his expression made her chest tighten, not in a romantic way, not in some dramatic movie moment, but in a human way, a way that made her feel seen, understood, and respected. For once, she didn't feel like the quiet girl who blended into the back of the room. She didn't feel like the student who answered questions only when called on or who walked the hallways without being noticed. She felt powerful. Important, visible. Amina tucked the test paper back into Mark's hand. "You earned this," she said. "Don't forget that." He nodded, clutching the paper like it was something precious. And maybe it was not because of the grade itself, but because of everything it represented. Weeks of trying, hours of tutoring, a new understanding between two people who used to be enemies, respect where there used to be resentment, growth where there used to be anger. A quiet transformation that no one expected. As students brushed past them, talking loudly about weekend plans and homework they forgot to do, Amina took a breath and let the moment sink in. She had stepped in once, barely 3 minutes after a bully pulled a teacher's hair, and everything changed. Not just for Mark, but for her. She discovered her own strength, her own voice, her own place in a world that often overlooked girls who didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't demand attention. And Mark discovered that real strength wasn't about fear or dominance, but about learning, listening, and choosing to be better. Amina lifted her chin, a soft confidence settling in her chest. She felt seen, respected, and stronger than ever, because the day she intervened wasn't just a moment of courage. It was the moment that rewrote everything for both of them.